Show. I am EJ the Collector. Happy to have you join us tonight and happy to be on the Family Podcast Network. Joining me, as always, every week, my tag team partner, the Eric to my Ivar, the beautiful Bobby to my lover boy Dennis. TG, TG, how you feeling tonight? You are with the Hoobastank of WCWF. I wouldn't give you that moniker, but if you want to name yourself that, go right ahead. How you doing, man?
If it's good enough for LA Knight, it's good enough for me.
I agree.
I'm doing well.
Yeah.
I'm doing well.
Yeah, excellent.
Can't complain.
We do not have Kelsey B with us tonight. Kelsey B was ripping wrestling wax on Whatnot last night for the Graybos Network, and she got to take care of a lot of other things. She's got to pay the bills, so she's off with us this week. We miss her. We send her our best. She'll be back and joining us next week. But tonight we're going to talk WWE. There's a moderate amount of things going on. Before I go any further, I told you you're the beautiful Bobby to my lover boy Dennis. That's a reference, of course, to the old Midnight Express. Did you see that the other third of the Midnight Express, Sweet Stan Lane, was finally exonerated of a vicious accusation of potentially being Lauren Boebert's father? He was proven not to be by DNA.
I thought that got sorted out like 6 months ago.
So, and we hadn't talked about it. Maybe it was a little bit further back than maybe most recently, but he had always denied it and finally got a DNA test and proved it, and good for him. I think that's the outcome he wanted, and I'm certainly behind that too. So shout out to the Midnight Express, and shout out to the rival, the Rock and Roll Express. You are the Ricky to my Robert, as always, too. All right, let's talk some things that have happened on TV in the last few days. We're a few weeks away from Payback. We're a few weeks out of SummerSlam. So let's talk about a couple of things that have happened over the last few days. Let's first of all just get to this. We'll talk about the main event on both shows as it is right now. On Raw last night, we saw a 6-man tag that closed the show. Cody and the tag team champions, Sammy and Kevin, who made his return. WWE did a great Canada loop the last couple of days. Their SmackDown was from Toronto, is that right? Mm-hmm. And last night was out of Quebec. Sammy and Kevin are both from the area, and Kevin returned, and they faced the Judgment Day. This has been like the same combination of wrestlers, like probably 15, 16 weeks in a row, going back a long time.
Definitely feels like it, yeah.
It definitely feels like Is there anything else they could or should be doing with these right now? Now that Cody's done with Brock and is maybe waiting on another, and maybe Kevin's not ready yet or hasn't been ready for a while, is this the best use of all of them? And then I want to get specific about one of them in particular.
Big picture, I think that what we are seeing is WWE under Triple H as the creative leader has a couple of different modes depending on whether the pay-per-view coming up is like a major show or sort of a minor pay-per-view.
There's five big ones now. It used to be a big 4. I'd say there's now 5.
Yeah, and I would even throw in like even something that they think is really important for business reasons.
The non-canon.
Right, could be non-canon, but is important for business reasons. Like that those builds will be a little bit different too. But when you're in like a Payback or those sorts of level of pay-per-view,
Fast Lane,
exactly. It becomes repetitive, and they just kind of get into a bit of a holding pattern because they want to save their big angle development for whatever the next big show is. In this case, it would be Survivor Series and then Royal Rumble thereafter, etc. So I within that context, do I think it's the best use? It's fine. I think if you had a different philosophy as far as business from pay-per-view to pay-per-view, I would say no, it's repetitive. And maybe it is repetitive.
There's a lot of gold mixed up in that repetition, though, right now.
Yeah, and I think that I'll put it this way. The stories, I think, are good. It is that they are not developing because they don't want any major stuff to happen, I think, until the pay-per-view and beyond that. So, like JD McDonough getting reintroduced into this, interjected into sort of the dissolution of the Judgment Day, like that's interesting. But I think that they're sort of spinning that plate until they get to a point of, where they feel like it's time to really move forward on it. I also think that in this case, like with Sammy and Kevin, there were injury issues that also prevented some of the development from happening because KO was out for a while. Obviously, can't do anything with him while he's out. Sammy had a minor issue with his elbow that kept him out of action for a week, I guess. And with Cody, heaven help me for saying this.
Mm-hmm.
I've talked myself now into thinking the obvious. To me, the guy that makes a lot of sense for Cody right now is Bray Wyatt. It really is.
There you go. That's
really
the best
is.
thing I could hear. Absolutely, yeah, you're 100% right. That falls right now on Bray's health, Bray's ability to return. But yes, as a placeholder until what we think is going to happen, we talked about it last week, especially after watching the documentary. He needs a 2 to 4 month gap. And it's something to test himself physically, mentally, it would all work right. I hope that's being fast tracked because that's obviously maybe not what everyone thinks off the top of their head, but if you've been following the product like we have been talking about for the last year, it really does make sense.
It's a really good fit for a couple of reasons. The first is that as we've talked about, you have sort of these. You have to keep Cody sort of spun off in his own, I don't want to say parallel universe, but sort of, they don't want him to go after the world title right now. And he can't go after Roman's title right now.
Right.
So because that's eventually where you want him to go, how do you keep a guy who is the number one face in the company occupied with something that is interesting and makes sense? Well, Brock Lesnar, that's a great option. And Bray Wyatt is somebody who it's a fresh opponent for him. It is a very strong contrast in styles. And there's a number of different ways that you could go creatively with it. Certainly you could take a very weird direction. Hopefully it would be a little bit better done than like what they did with LA Knight, how that kind of ended. I think in a way that everybody kind of agrees was like, it didn't really click. So it keeps him busy. It as a new opponent, creatively, I think there's a good opportunity there, and it's a very strong contrast to characters. And it would be, if you're going to ask me, like, okay, who's a list of opponents that Cody could have right now that would check all those boxes, keeps him away from both world title pictures, keeps Cody at the top of the card or near the top of the card, and also allows him to sort of remain strong and over. That is a very short list, and I would say Bray Wyatt's at the top of it.
It's a short list for several reasons. Also, just because the talent depth at the main event level is finite. Cody's so special and in such a unique position right now that a program with Gunther for the Intercontinental title would make sense in a lot of other times and places and universes, but because of the trajectory and because of to protect him, that wouldn't make a lot of sense. But it would be another great program.
Awesome matches. Again, two guys who have different styles, but who both can tell great stories in the ring. But like you said, like there are these constraints around Cody that make sense if the goal is WrestleMania 40 rematch. But within those constraints, you aren't able to do a number of potential feuds that you would otherwise maybe consider. And Gunther is definitely one of them, in part because Gunther has his own sort of trajectory now. I mean, I don't know who's eventually going to take the title off of him. I don't think it's Chad. I mean, maybe it's Chad Gable. I don't think it's Chad Gable, at least before he breaks the record. He's going to break that record. It would be stupid for him at this point not to break the record. But I think as I've referenced sort of briefly in the past, I think that eventually Gunther is the guy on Monday Night Raw who is the world heavyweight champion. That's months away.
That's a long way away, and depending on how drafts and reorgs go, Cody and Gunther can be a WrestleMania 42 main event way down the road.
Yeah, and I'm thinking like that's probably Gunther as the world champion is probably a 2024 thing. So either so I think he is either at the latest he's challenging for the world title at WrestleMania 40. And I think it might even be more likely that he is defending that title at WrestleMania 40. So he's got that whole thing has to play out. But to go back to the point about Cody and Bray, again, this is a really tremendous opportunity to have maybe the one guy who really does comport to all those constraints, and it would still be a really interesting and potentially productive use of Cody's time. So this is and here's the bottom line. This is the danger. Whenever you have long-term booking. So let's go back, for example, to, The Rock and John Cena, and the initial sort of challenge is 1 year from now, we're going to face at WrestleMania. So it's like, okay, great. Like, on the one hand, that's really cool because it's like, we got a WrestleMania main event a year in advance, but The Rock is obviously busy. He's not going to be there every week. So you have to figure out ways to keep John Cena occupied that maintains his momentum, that makes sense, that leads to interesting conflicts, even within the parameters of a year from now, he's got The Rock at WrestleMania. And Cody, even though it hasn't been stated as explicitly, he is operating in a similar structure because of what they're probably going to do, and because he's not going after the world title. So again, if you said like, oh, this could be if you said Bray Wyatt returns at Payback, and now I'm calm down. I know you're going to. I know it's like
hold myself down in my
the
chair.
Vince McMahon meme where he's like tipping back over.
I wanted it at SummerSlam. I'm willing to wait till Payback. Sure.
Yeah. So if you said like, okay, he makes a surprise appearance at Payback, and then that leads to a feud that goes all the way through Survivor Series, I think that would make perfect sense. And then after you get through Survivor Series, then it's looking towards the Rumble and that kind of direction. So, I mean, that to me, and once you get to the Rumble, if Cody wins the Rumble again, now you're set. Now you can do a 3-month build or 2.5-month build for Roman and Cody too, and then now you're good to go. So anyway, that was all a long sort of tangent off of your initial question.
But it's what I wanted to get to at some point, as well.
So I think that all those guys are. I can't say it's ideal from the standpoint of like month to month booking, but I think long term it's going to work out for all those guys.
And they're not putting much focus on the tag titles right now. That's mostly because Kevin's been out. They weren't really putting much focus on it before that, but it'll get going. Right now, they're using it to get the crowd even more invested in them, and it's becoming less and less important for the two of them to remain champions because they have a dynamic they can turn on and off at any time, and they can if one inevitably turns on the other, which is what always happens. Their singles programs are great. Their tag programs. I'm not too worried about the tag titles right now because I think once Cody breaks and whatever happens with the briefcase, this will all start figuring itself out. So I do want to talk about one of the men in that 6-man tag. Oh, let me also mention, speaking of men, Rhea Ripley gave Kevin Owens a hell of a body slam.
Rhea Ripley.
Yeah, a body slam. I don't know if they're ever going to let her mix it up with the men. I know any more than she already does. I know she wants to. It'd be fabulous, but probably not in the cards just because of the nature of the project any more than we saw. I mean, would you agree with that? We've seen the max of what her physical involvement will be. She'll slap a guy. She could take a stunner from Kevin Owens. It could happen, but they're not going to start having regular matches.
What was really interesting to me about the presentation last night was early on in the show, they indicated, any two members of Judgment Day, and that was kind of a through line through the show. And they were sort of talking about her as a potential being one of the two, and they weren't commenting on it. In other words, they weren't like acting like that would be strange to have her be one of the two. Yeah. And I think like based on especially last night's show, she at this point is really the de facto leader of that group. Excellent
point and excellent segue to talk about this topic is Finn Balor. Yeah, I agree with you. Rhea is absolutely the leader. That leader up until maybe just now was Finn Balor. Take a walk down memory lane when Finn Balor made his debut. Over the last 8-9 years, when I've been sort of reinvested in the product, and especially along with NXT, the WWE has sort of employed 3 different tactics to bring wrestlers in. One of the tactics now is to sign these college athletes people who don't have a ton of wrestling experience and train them in the PC to be WWE performers. That's fine. They've also, in the last few years, taken guys who have previously been in WWE, either did or did not make names of themselves other places, and were gone from WWE from a short to a long period of time before bringing them back into the current product. I don't count like the ones like Strowman or Wyatt, guys who were like released during cuts and brought back before they really did anything else of significance. Not those guys. LA Knight made a decent name for himself in NWA and in Impact, and then had come into the Performance Center as an established free agent. You know, he never really did the whole indie scene like Cody and Matt Cardona had did. He was employed by like the third and fourth tier for a good long period of time. Bronson Reed is an interesting case because he was a NXT WWE member, right? And then he went to Japan and was like full on changed his name to Jonah. We saw him at Capital Combat, didn't we? I believe we did. He was in like
I know that at some point, and this is where I got confused because
he was in an 8-man tag at Capital Combat with like Jeff Cobb.
So that was the thing that confused. It was like he and Jeff Cobb are kind of similar physically.
Mm-hmm.
And what I couldn't remember was I know that Bronson Reed was I think he was AEW adjacent. Like he wasn't signed by AEW, but he was doing things like Capital Combat, was working in Japan on shows that had AEW
New Japan. Yeah, New Japan really was what he was doing. And then he was involved in the beginnings of the Forbidden Door stuff, even though he did not appear at the first Forbidden Door. He was already maybe gone by then. Anyway, so we go back to maybe AJ Styles, who had never been in WWE, but had dominated everywhere. And Karrion Kross is the other one. Karrion Kross, when he got signed by WWE, he was a very big deal in the indies as Killer Kross. He was a hot signing when it happened. I think about him not on the same level as an LA Knight, but he was making his name mostly in Major League Wrestling. But out of all those, when Hideo Itami, who was Kenta, debuted, that was a huge get for WWE to get an international talent who's recognized, maybe not on American television, but him. But Finn Balor, maybe not since AJ, maybe Nakamura and AJ, he is as up there as any talent they've ever had who had a international name to come to debut. I think, like, you know, before AEW, he was the equivalent of a Kenny Omega coming in. Did you know that he was as big as he was internationally before he got signed?
I had heard of him.
Okay.
And I say that because I don't really follow the international wrestling scene. So the fact that I had heard of him, I say that as an indicator of like even I, as sort of a casual wrestling fan who really just watched WWE, was like aware of who he was and what he had done.
Definitely I mean, he never was New Japan champion, but he was the leader he was the originator. He created the Bullet Club. That's a big deal to then get to go for WWE to get him many years ago. And they haven't had a lot of guys. Like Jay White would have been huge, but he went to AEW. But along those lines, Finn Balor's had a great career in WWE. He's been a multi-time champion on many levels and was the first Universal title holder. However, he held it just for one day. There's no reason why Finn Balor should have been continually in the main event picture. He's in it right now, but he's made to look like the Tom in Tom and Jerry.
Oh, for a second, I thought this could be an insult to me.
He's getting briefcase slid under his legs to get these losses.
Like that, though. I enjoyed that a lot.
It's entertaining. It's entertaining, but I don't think it's the proper treatment of a star like Finn Balor. So tell me, is how he's being used right now to maybe be mean, for a while, it was looking like it was going to happen at SummerSlam, to be a conduit to a Damian Priest title before, as we predicted earlier, Gunther takes a reign. I think Finn Balor deserves better. What say you?
I like Finn a lot. I think this is, I think, an example or an instance where the story, telling the story is taking priority over the individual impact of like wins and losses.
Mm-hmm.
So to your point, like if you look on paper, okay, what are Finn's last, 5 results or whatever of televised matches? And it's like, wow, this guy is just getting beat and beat and beat. He had 2 title shots, lost both of them. He's losing on TV, et cetera, et cetera. Like that looks bad. But I don't think we can fully evaluate what it's going to do to his standing in the company from a kayfabe standpoint, standing in the company until we see how the rest of this plays out. Because there is a scenario. So 2 things. First of all, this is the first time that he had been, like when he was feuding with Cody for the title. It's the first time he had been in the main event scene since he lost to Roman like 2 years earlier. Maybe?
Edge wasn't a main title picture. It was a main event scene, wasn't it?
I guess, but I don't.
Nothing
main
other than
event
that.
for a championship.
Okay.
Let's say that. So that, if you're a Finn Balor fan, then the consolation I guess you could take is that, look, he didn't win, but he is being portrayed on TV as a legitimate threat to the title and a contender, a guy who's worthy of multiple championship shots. Okay. I think that we have to see how the rest of this plays out, because I think, I've kind of gone back and forth on what I think the sequence is going to be, because there's so one scenario is Damian successfully cashes in and then immediately begins feuding with Finn. There's one scenario where he tries to cash in, fails, and then immediately feuds with Finn. There's another scenario where he cashes in, is successful, and then they have like a long program where it's him and Finn for the title for some time, and the Judgment Day breaks up. So I think that the reason it's hard to answer your question about whether they're doing Finn right or wrong right now is because I do think that there's going to be more to come in this story that is going to directly affect whether or not Finn is going to be. I mean, he could be in the main event picture or the world title picture on Raw for the rest of the year. So I don't love seeing him lose all the time, but let's also remember, Seth Rollins, who is clearly like the number one pushed guy right now on Raw, along with Cody, is, he lost repeatedly to Cody, like decisively, including a match where Cody was visibly severely injured and he still lost to him. And Seth came out the other end, I think, as good or better in terms of where he was on the card. So TBD. I agree there's cause for concern, but I think because there's so much story wrapped up in what they're doing, that there's still more to come.
Okay.
So we'll see.
Okay, before we switch kind of to SmackDown, anything else jump out at you from last night you wanted to bring up?
There is one thing. There was I guess I knew this was going to happen, and then I forgot until I saw the commercial. But just as they did the Cody documentary on Peacock that started airing a couple weeks ago, it's going to be a Kurt Angle one.
Okay.
And so I wanted to ask you a question.
Yeah.
And this is a bit of a leading question, I will admit. Is Kurt Angle the most talented, from a professional wrestling standpoint, the most talented professional wrestler ever?
We're not talking anything like technical versus overall versus
all around,
just all everything around.
Mm-hmm. I have a definitive answer for this in my book.
Okay. I couldn't say definitively yes, just because I look at some of the careers of others, impacts of others who can match and at times match his technical skill. I think, and I'm trying to think if he had even a run. He's never brought up on your Mount Rushmores hardly ever. He's not in anyone. I mean, I'd say I can't definitively say yes. Are you about to say definitively yes?
Definitively yes. And here's why. I don't think he's the greatest professional wrestler of all time. The question was most talented. And I think that part of, sort of the I don't want to say the tragedy, because he still had a great Hall of Fame career, no question.
Okay.
But I think what pushes him from there is a universe in which he is the number one guy ever. We don't live in that universe, but he had, his injuries, and then which led to painkillers and etc. affected all that. This is what I always say. The biggest star to come out of the business, biggest star, is The Rock. The biggest star within the business, Hulk Hogan.
I'm with you so far.
The hottest ever is probably Steve Austin, like for a moment in time in terms of like how big he was.
So far,
the best all around pro wrestler, if you take all the criteria, I still think is Ric Flair. Here's the thing about Kurt Angle. So this is the argument I make for most talented. Let me give you, because I took some notes on this earlier today because I want to get the dates right. So here's the Kurt Angle timeline. Now, obviously, Olympic gold medalist, so extremely talented athlete. You could make an argument that he's the best athlete who ever like full-time transitioned to pro wrestling. I mean, there are other guys in that conversation, obviously, but he, winning an Olympic gold medal in wrestling that's crazy. I mean, that is like elite tier.
Yeah.
Okay. So Kurt Angle, he begins training in late August 1998. He had never done any pro wrestling before. Famously, he was offered a contract in 96 and he by WWF at the time. And he was like, okay, but I don't ever want to lose. And Vince was like, I don't think you really get what we do here. Right. So he was like walked and Angle subsequently was like, I was an idiot. I didn't get it. So he walks away, comes back, does a tryout because now it's like 2 years later. And they're like, of course, like, yes, we would like to sign you. So he starts training in late 98. He has his first televised WWF match, November 14th, 1999. That's Survivor Series.
Yeah.
February 8th, 2000, he wins the European title. 19 days later, he wins the Intercontinental title. June 25th, still in the year 2000, he wins King of the Ring. October 22nd, 2000, less than a year after he debuted, he beats The Rock for the WWF title. So my point is there another human being who has ever done pro wrestling? And to go back to something you were talking about a minute ago, this isn't a guy who, bounced around the indies for 10 years and really honed his craft. He's not a guy who was in Japan for 5 years and then came to WWE. He's not a guy who was in WCW or AEW or another large organization and went to WWE, WWF. This is a guy who had his first ever, took his first ever pro wrestling bump at the hands of Tom Pritchard and Dory Funk in August of 1998. And in October of the year 2000, less than a year after he had his first match on TV, he's the WWF champion after beating The Rock. And by the way, it wasn't like, oh my gosh, this guy, they're pushing him way too fast. It was like, holy crap, this guy is the most natural I've ever seen at this. He was a incredible heel on the mic, some of the most entertaining stuff that we've ever seen. As sort of a smarmy, holier than thou, all American heel, sort of the flip side of the Hulk Hogan character from 10 to 15 years earlier. Just amazing, and not to mention the fact that again, athletically as talented as anybody who's ever done it, and pick this stuff up. I mean, that's the part that blows my mind. Think about how many people even to go to somebody like Ric Flair or Dusty Rhodes or all these great guys. A lot of them didn't really become the guys we know for many years. And then they peaked, reached who they were, and then were there for, in some cases decades, but many, many years. Angle, it was months. I mean, months from 0 to 60 in 2.5 seconds. Like, crazy. I don't think anybody else has ever had that trajectory. And so I think he is the most talented guy ever to do it. If you're asking me, where does he rank in the history of pro wrestling? I would say top 20 as a single guy. Top 20, but he's, like you said, I wouldn't put him on the Mount Rushmore, but just in terms of talent. And that's what that promo or the ad made me think about. So that's my rant for the night.
Wow, that made me want to watch that documentary and hope it's as covered as well as you just laid it out. When I don't think of him on that Rock, Stone Cold, Ric Flair, Undertaker, because different expectations. They were global superstars that attracted.
Yeah.
I think of Angle. I think about his contemporaries being like your Shawn Michaels, your Bret Harts. And that's where I guess we're both in agreement that maybe he wasn't as skilled as Bret Hart, but he was far more. I think he had a lot more charisma than Bret Hart.
Yeah.
Shawn Michaels, Kurt Angle could out wrestle him, but that wasn't really the sport he was in. It mixed everything. And while Angle was great at it, Shawn Michaels might be among the best ever to do it too. So yeah, when you just say most talented and you break it down like that, I could nod along with you. But wow, I mean, I would have definitely had him in my top 20.
Think about like a guy taking his first bump. Like he's at pro wrestling camp basically for the first. Now he's got great trainers, don't get me wrong, but so do a lot of people. He takes his first bump ever, and a year and a half later, he's the WWF champion.
How
is that even possible?
Well, that was done a lot on him, but just those are just as much executives Vince making that decision to do that. He didn't wrestle and earn that European title. He earned it, but not in the way of competition that he was most used to. So that's a lot credit to him, but also just the office did that.
I get that it's a work, and you're right about that. But what I'm saying is, it wasn't like when he became the champion in October or November, whatever, October of 2000. It wasn't, like I said before, it wasn't like, oh gosh, this is a mistake. Like they're putting a title on a guy who he doesn't have it, or it's way too soon. It was like, oh yes, obviously, like this is the guy. I mean, it's crazy. And that's the thing, because and Steve Austin has talked about this, and so has Ric Flair. I've heard them both talk about this. Like pro wrestling, people, because it is a sport in the sense it's athletic, it's very different than other athletic endeavors, because in most athletic endeavors, especially like professional team sports, for example, especially football and basketball, like you're really hitting your physical prime probably between ages 24 and 28-ish.
Mm-hmm.
In pro wrestling, Steve Austin was like, you don't even know anything until you're in your 30s. Like, and that's when you get really, really good, because so much of it is about psychology and sort of understanding in-ring storytelling. And yes, that's physical. But the point is that there absolutely is a physical component, but there's also a reason that guys are able to continue to do it at a high level well into their 40s if they are among the best. So, and this is a good segue to SmackDown, you have guys like Sheamus and Edge, who are 45 to 47, I think.
Yep.
Who are still like able to really put on these great, entertaining physical matches. And so, final point in Angle, the fact that you had a dude who had virtually no seasoning whatsoever and could credibly, and I don't mean credibility like, oh, he's an Olympic gold medalist credibility. I mean credibly like his in-ring work is as good as anybody in the company at this point, and he's been doing it for 18 months. I don't think there has ever been anyone else in wrestling, and I'm happy to be corrected if there is somebody else like this, but I don't think there's ever been anyone else in wrestling who has been at that level with that spotlight, which, as you said, absolutely is part of that's The Office, who has been able to do that so quickly. I just don't think it exists. And
Right.
I think
Well,
part of that is his background, of course, as an athlete, and as an athlete, but it's just, I can't believe, if you had told me in 1999 that it was even possible for someone to do that, I would have said, I don't think so. It's just not realistic.
Before we switch topics, I'll just leave you with this one. There is someone who I think, if they had pulled the trigger, could have done it in a shorter period of time, and that man is right now, and that's Logan Paul. Would we even entertain the thought? Would we even entertain the thought that Logan Paul is the most talented guy ever in wrestling? When literally, when he first came in with the Miz at WrestleMania, it would have required the same, probably even a more level of commitment than Angle, who was there every day after that. Yeah. But I bet it wouldn't. If they had decided to do that every 6 to 7 weeks with Logan Paul, it's entirely conceivable they could have done
I will say this.
How about that?
He is it's an interesting hypothetical, and I wouldn't even dismiss it.
At times it sounded like you were describing Logan Paul.
Yeah, I mean, I will say this. I think it's an interesting parallel, and I will agree that I think Angle and Logan Paul are the two most natural talents that I've ever seen to be able to jump into like the biggest company there is, the highest level in terms of eyeballs, and to look that good is it's hard to believe that it's even possible, but they've done it. So.
If Logan Paul stopped boxing and maybe stopped his podcast, he wouldn't need to stop his Prime Empire, or if he gave up one of his other endeavors and added it to his WWE commitment, I could see it. He could win the world title from Roman Reigns at WrestleMania 40.
It's pretty crazy to think about, and I think that the one thing. So here's the biggest difference.
So yeah, honestly. I mean, basically, I'm just saying, like, impressive, all his stats on Kurt Angle, and not to diminish Kurt Angle at all, but like at times when I closed my eyes during what you were saying, I pictured Logan Paul too.
Yeah, I think that here's the difference, and this is something that helped Angle, and obviously it doesn't hurt Paul, but it's the reason why this comparison can only go so far. Is, to your point, Angle was like, this is my full-time gig, and I'm just doing this. Mm-hmm. And Logan Paul, as we've talked about in the past, there's so much money that he makes from non-WWE stuff that, like, in his portfolio, so to speak, of income, WWE is insane to think about, but it's like a tiny fraction of that. So he would never be in a position, unless he was just like his passion, he would never be in a position to sort of be motivated, or it wouldn't even be rational for him to put in the level of commitment and time that Angle did, because it like, if I were his money manager, I'd be like, it's great that you want to do this, and I think it's cool to do it occasionally to sort of expand your fan base or your brand, but like, you're going to lose potentially like 50 to 80% of your income if you're like, I'm a full-time WWE wrestler now.
Right.
Like, that would be nuts. So
anyway. Well, Logan Paul takes on Dylan Dennis this Saturday. They had their press conference today. It was bananas. So we still don't know why WWE is letting Logan do this, but I think the answer is Logan wasn't going to sign unless this stuff like this was baked in. Yeah. But they've been making a spectacle of it, both online. They both sort of at times embarrass themselves. But we're going to have a conclusion on Saturday. KSI and the Fury brother and Logan and Dylan Dennis are finally going to like duke it out over a woman's heart and a woman's love. So we'll see.
I think that question of, and we talked about it a little bit when Cheats was on last time, but I think that question of like why WWE would allow him to do it, to me, is like almost like asking, why would WWE allow Bad Bunny to tour? It's like, right. Like, let's figure out who the tail and the dog are in this equation. Yeah. It's like, he's gonna do what he's gonna do.
Totally. We've been teasing a move to SmackDown topics, but just there's a topic I want you to talk about, and just remind me. I don't even know off the top of my head if this is a Raw or a SmackDown topic. The women's tag team situation, which has been cursed for a long time now.
Yeah.
When Liv and Raquel won it from Ronda and Shayna, is that right? Yeah. Which one of them got hurt and forced them to drop it? Was it Liv?
So Liv got hurt legitimately, and this
Yeah.
was so Liv, I think, has had two. It's hard to keep track of the chronology.
It is.
I think they had the titles a long time ago, and I think Liv got hurt, and then they dropped the titles,
Okay.
and they had a tournament.
That's right.
Correct.
You're
and then
correct.
Shayna and Ronda won the tournament easily.
That's right.
And they came back, and then Shayna did the turn on Ronda. Liv and Raquel win them again, and then Liv had a minor injury, and they had to drop them again. Which the worst part, I mean, not the worst part, but another bad thing about that was they had already planned, I think, to do an injury angle with Raquel. So this weird situation where it's like, oh, Liv is hurt for real, and we're doing an injury angle with Raquel. So
They're doing it. Yeah, she has one right now. Is this the worked angle you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
So now she's back. Now she's cleared, and so she's going to challenge Rhea for the singles title.
For the singles title. Okay. So Chelsea and Sonya won that from a real injured Liv and a worked injured Raquel.
I think that's right.
And then not immediately, Sonya goes out with a horrible knee injury. She's out many months.
Right.
So obviously what they're going to have to do, drop the titles just like they did previously. Precedent said, oh, wait a minute. No, they're not doing that. Chelsea was going to have auditions. That could have been an interesting angle, and maybe that still will happen. But
so this is my big frustration.
Let me just, before you get into it, let me just say something I have no problem with, because I like her as talent, and I think she's has a great personality, and I think she has potential if they will let her do her thing and get some momentum. Piper Niven, I think, is a badass. No problems with it. I'm totally cool with her being in a titles quasi high profile picture, and the fact that she just walked in and said, no, we're not having any interviews or tryouts, I'm the champ, and they had a successful defense last night on Raw. Is this a Raw angle or a SmackDown angle? Or
it's Raw.
It's Raw. Okay. Raw. So we haven't done SmackDown. So okay, please, your frustration with this and what they should have done and what they might do.
Okay, so I have two frustrations with it. I have no problem with Piper Niven being the other tag team champ. That's fine.
Cool.
Number one, don't bring up a good idea on TV. The idea of like the auditions, like, oh, that could be fun. And then it's like, nope, we're not doing it. It's like, just don't bring it up. Just have Piper come in and be like, I'm the tag team champ.
It was really a throwaway line, but it piqued your interest.
That's a big frustration for me. Because like, why introduce the idea of something that people might like and then immediately be like, oh no, we're not doing that. We just thought we'd throw it out there and then not do it.
Vignettes every week could have been great.
And by the way, you can do that, and then 4 weeks later, Piper still it's her. Like, she bullies her way or whatever, intimidates her way into being the other title holder. That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I have a little bit of reservations about is I'm worried that Piper being sort of this dominant towards Chelsea will have an unfortunate effect of making Chelsea somewhat sympathetic, even though her obviously is just a pure heel.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's a little bit of that you might be undermining. I would rather see Piper just bully their opponents and then do it that way and put her over as like a badass, champion who carries the load for the team, because Chelsea is not really that she's more like in the Miz category of competitors.
Mm-hmm.
So those are my two concerns. I think those will fade after a week or two of them just being the tag champs. But as you said, I mean, this was something that they had wanted to. One thing we forgot, we were running down sort of the history of the curse of these belts, is the fact that the whole game plan like months ago was for Shayna and Ronda to win the titles and to sort of solidify that division, to be like a dominant sort of top team, and then eventually to pass the torch to whoever the next team was after like having a couple of long feuds and building up some established teams below them. And that had to be short-circuited a bit or truncated a bit, because remember, Ronda was dealing with an injury, and so they couldn't kickstart that plan until it was just a couple of months before Ronda was going to leave anyway.
Yep.
And so
we've covered that on previous shows too, right?
Yeah, and it wound up being kind of rushed, and then then you had the sequence of injuries after that sort of really threw things into like a bit of chaos. So hopefully this time it'll solidify, and they'll have a better opportunity to kind of establish some of these teams. So
have we seen Toxic Attraction make their debut? I mean, they've already been sort of put in the dustbin already, unless one of them's hurt. One of them might be hurt. But this tag team with Casey, who they defeat last night?
That's who they beat. It's Caden Carter and Katana Chance. I always have to think of Katana Chance because that's Casey Catanzaro's name, and I forget what it is. But yeah.
So are the likes of like Gigi Dolan, Cora Jade, Indy Hartwell's on the main roster. She was drafted. Mm-hmm. I guess that's the next, because everybody else seemingly is either involved in this. I mean, Damage Control is in this main title picture, and Bayley herself is on a path with Shotzi, wherever that's going. But who else is right now? I still think there's not a lot of great options unless they're going to really bring more of that NXT roster up.
Yeah, and I think that's possibly the way they're going to have to go. I think this is what's so interesting to me about the men's tag division, because so you have unified tag team champs that are really, I mean, fundamentally they're more known as singles guys, or at least they have been in their WWE careers. And because of the Bloodline storyline, they got put together, and it made total sense for them to win and all that. But at the same time that's happening, WWE is starting to build and or revive like several viable tag team contenders, because you've seen a resurgence for the Street Profits, and their characters have been tweaked a bit and aligned with Bobby Lashley. And then you're also seeing this, the New Day has come back.
Yep.
You're seeing I was about to say, you're seeing a new tag team with Drew McIntyre and Matt Riddle, although I think that is inevitably going to fail and lead to a feud between the two of them. But anyway.
Poor Drew, if that's the case.
Well, did we ever confirm that he had actually re-signed with WWE?
I sort of stopped paying attention on the dirt sheets. I'm sure that would be available. I'm going to guess like he did, but I never saw there was never sort of any real announcements or any even really like breaking news on the socials about it. No one.
So when he was gone, the talk was that they were just kind of letting his contract expire, and then he came back, and then when Triple H was asked about it at whatever pay-per-view press conference that was, he was like, "Oh no, everything's good. Like, first I've heard of it." And I'm like, okay, but you haven't really answered the question about like, does he have a long-term deal or not? So again, I don't know if there is like what the future trajectory is for him, or
he was hurt for a while, so this could be just the time added. He may not have had to resign yet because they're just moved that time up. Which,
by the way, that is why, based on what I've read, which it's wrestling, who knows, but based on what I've read, that's also why Edge cannot debut yet for AEW if he goes that way, because when he was hurt, they added some time on the back end of his contract, which pushes it into September supposedly. So
it would be great if he was able if he was surprised and was with Christian, went against Christian, but it's just probably not in the cards. I'll never say that. Oh, Edge is too loyal to Vince. No, that has nothing to do with it.
Here's a question: why have we not seen anything from William Regal since he went back to WWE? Is that not weird?
Unless there was some clause that prevented him, whatever the duration of his AEW contract was going to be, if he can't spend that time in front of a WWE camera, unless there were some terms of the contract being dissolved with AEW, that's the only thing that would make sense. If they're not using him, I think that'd be wrong, considering how hot he was when he left. My guess, and you're a lawyer, I bet part of like Tony said, I'll let you out of your contract because that's what he did. However, I signed you through February 2024, and I just ask that you can do all you want with WWE except appear on television. And I bet Regal was okay with that.
I may have the details wrong, but my recollection when this all happened was that he only had like 3 more months on his AEW contract, which I think would have taken to April.
Maybe it's a concession that they agreed to. Who knows? Who knows?
Well, I mean, I think there definitely was some concession made. The part that surprises me is that this is an like a absurdly, if it is like a non-compete, some kind of addendum that's a non-compete to let him out of the contract.
Mhm.
This is an absurdly long duration for this, because
Yeah.
it would have, at this point, it would have exceeded the end of the original length of the contract by at least 4 months, and could be longer, assuming I have those details right. That was my recollection.
Yeah.
But I mean, keeping him off TV, I'll put it this way: I don't think I would have made that deal if I was WWE. I would have been like, we're not going to keep him off TV for a year. Like,
he was too good. You're right. You're not wrong. And we'll
just wait till April, and we'll have him before SummerSlam. So why?
It was so good. There is going to be a War Games probably coming up, I think, in NXT. So there's your opportunity right there. Yeah. So he'll do that. Okay. So in the time we have left, there's like another topic. I don't think we need to really get too deep into any Bloodline stuff right now. There's nothing really huge going on. Jay's gone. Jimmy's working it out. So no one's leaving each other right now. No one's bailing on each other. Paul Heyman's doing the legwork right now, and no one better. He's great. And I don't think we need to really talk too much this week about LA Knight. He is as big a star as he's ever been. It's just getting louder and louder each week. I don't think he needs a title, but I hope he's going to get that U.S. title. That's where he is right now. And I think right now you got to consider LA Knight is even a sleeper as far as like in the Royal Rumble in January, making noise there, because the crowd's not turning on him anytime soon. He's riding a huge crest. We don't need to get too much into LA Knight. He's doing great. He's top. But let's talk about somebody in our few minutes remaining who's fairly new, kind of like LA Knight on the roster. He is appearing in prime slot segments with prime talent, and he's making a name for himself kind of out of the gate, and that's Grayson Waller. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Grayson Waller is, so far, they're using him merely as the host of a show. He's had some matches. He's participated in the Battle Royal at SummerSlam. Didn't do anything of note there, despite a couple of promos that he was going to win it. He's been as much of he's like the resident troll right now to whip the crowd up. And like, he didn't hold too many titles in NXT, I don't think, but he played this character and he's really good. He's very engaging. He's charismatic as hell, and there's no reason to think he can't go in the ring. So I want to talk about Grayson Waller's presentation so far as you see it on the main roster, and a potential trajectory for that guy in the career in a increasingly crowded field of a lot of athletic, charismatic guys who are around right now and are coming through.
What's really interesting to me, and this is an interesting topic, but what's really interesting to me about Grayson Waller specifically is that on the one hand, they clearly are positioning him. Like, you can make the argument that he is getting a massive push.
He's getting the Austin Theory. He's getting the Austin Theory treatment, sort of.
You can make the argument that he's getting a massive push. You could also make the argument that he's not really getting pushed at all, and that's the weird thing. And to some extent, like, LA Knight is a little bit in the same boat. And here's what I mean. You're absolutely right. Like, if you look at what they've done with Grayson Waller so far, they put him in a ring with Cena. They put him in a ring with Edge. Now they've had him like chirping a little bit with The Rock.
Yep. He's opening SmackDown on Friday nights.
How many matches has he won? I mean, it's either 1 or 0 on TV. I can't remember if he's won a match.
Yeah,
honestly,
if he's competing on the road, I bet he's losing.
Even Edge, who was weeks away, presumably, from wrapping up his WWE run, like, beat him clean. Like, it was a competitive match, and at the end, he sort of gave him the rub, like, you swam, kid, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But here's a guy who ostensibly is one of the guys that they see a lot of potential in, and he's wrestling a guy who's on his way out, who's a legend. You would think that this would be the opportunity for maybe for Edge. And I'm not criticizing the decision. I was, rooting for Edge, of course.
Mhm.
But in the same way that Cena put Austin Theory over at WrestleMania, you would think it would be sort of a similar situation. And yet it's not happening. And they've had so here's why it's an interesting question. With these sort of contrasting and maybe almost contradictory things that are happening around Austin Theory, around Grayson Waller and to Grayson Waller, the big question I have is, if you really see something in him, are you going to have him host a talk show segment more so than actually compete? And the reason I say that specifically is because most of his talk show like if you take other guys who have had talk show segments, who have been big stars, not always, but often those talk show segments are designed to put them in feuds, to advance them into a feud that will get them to a big match on a big show.
Jericho's always did. Miz is not always, but yeah.
Yeah, Jericho for sure. Even going back to, Roddy Piper.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, guys like that. So my point is that this for most of the shows, if not all of them, that he's done so far, it really has been sort of like a talk show in the sense of like, I'm using my time here. Yes, I'm getting over this character a little bit as sort of a smart aleck sort of heel, but really story-wise, this really is about the other people on the show. It's not about me. And you're right. The Miz, Miz TV has definitely done that over the years, but that was more after Miz was already an established guy. He had held title, like before he was even a singles guy at all, he had held, multiple tag team championships, etc. So I don't know the answer to the question because it's difficult to discern from what we have seen on our televisions up to now exactly how the company feels about him, because I do think they see him as a guy like, yes, we want him to be on TV and we like him from that standpoint. But I don't know if they see him as a guy who's going to be like competing for, let's say, the U.S. title in 6 months or 4 months or whatever. It's really hard to suss it out right now.
That's a good succinct breakdown of Grayson. Do you like Grayson Waller? I have yet to figure out if I dig it or if it's obnoxious and I don't need it or if it's pointless. I don't know where I am yet on Grayson Waller, but like I'm not down on really too many people. I want them all to be successful and want the whole product to be successful. I just don't know where I am yet on him.
I think he needs different wrestling gear. There's something about his gear that is, I don't know, it just doesn't. Something about, I just remember the couple matches I've seen him wrestle, I'm like, this doesn't make him look like a star. I don't know what it is. I'd have to actually see it to be able to tell you specifically. In terms of his character, I think the character is good. It's just always hard to kind of evaluate those types of characters because they're supposed to irritate you. So you have to kind of say, like, is this good irritation? Or is this like, is it go away heat or is it like good heat? And it's hard. It's sometimes there's a fine line there. I think for me so far, I'd say thumbs up.
I agree. That's pretty much all we got. We came with pretty tight hour we have here. One thing you said in the group chat the other day, which I totally agree with, is that the build for Shinsuke Nakamura, Seth Rollins, has been fantastic. Shinsuke's vignette last night, top notch. Among the best work, how he's been presented.
I think it's my favorite thing that I've seen him in.
Yeah,
out of ring stuff.
I'm glad he's in the spot. I am really looking forward to their match at Payback. I don't think Seth's title has been in more jeopardy than it is right now. He's had it. He's established that title as important. He is someone who at any time you can take a title off him and it not really affect his standing. So with everything else they want to do with the briefcase being on Raw, with the Fate of the Judgment Day on Raw, we talked about how could Finn be a linchpin between Damian. Shinsuke is going to play into that. I think Shinsuke actually might take the title off Seth at Payback, but we don't need to make our predictions for that yet. Only other really news about WWE, and this is a huge week for wrestling because, as everyone knows, AEW is doing All In on this upcoming weekend. We will talk about it on Thursday on Wrestling Chat with Friends. Cheats and I hope you'll join us for that Thursday at 8. But also, when talking about like huge gates, tickets for WrestleMania 40 went on sale, and they sold 90,000 plus tickets. So does that make what they're doing at Wembley nothing now? Because
no, of course not. I mean that is a
as far as records go, AEW was attempting to claim some ticket number record over like SummerSlam 92 or wherever they were, but it sounds like that's now a moot point because 90,000 paid and they haven't reached 90,000 in Wembley. I don't know, just like there was a lot of tossing around record numbers, and we talked about a little bit about it last week about just records and what they're actually using to calculate that.
I think it's still a huge deal for AEW.
Huge
any way
deal.
You slice it.
Huge deal.
Until WrestleMania 40 actually happens, AEW has the record, and of course, we don't count North Korea because that's
right.
You have to go to the show, or else your family members are going to disappear.
Extremely not. The only cannon in the net is the one that was pointed at the people if they didn't attend it.
Right.
Yeah. So awesome for WrestleMania. That's gonna be huge at the Link, not far from
I didn't even know. I honestly didn't know the Link could hold that many people. Obviously, different configuration than football, but I was surprised by that number just from a standpoint of capacity. I didn't think they could fit that many people in there.
That will set the record at the Link for sure, and that could set some. Yeah. I guess that's it's not indoor. I guess is the Link retractable. I don't know, indoor, outdoor. Man, the only way that you can start fitting those North Korean numbers, if WWE want to try that, you'd have to have it at like the Daytona Speedway or the Indy Speedway. You have to configure a racetrack to hold it, and they hold events at racetracks. They hold concerts at some racetracks. So but you can mix your wrestling. I mean, people talked about Yankee Stadium. That's not going to break any records. You can fit 70. It'd be a great one. Fit 70,000. Have SummerSlam there. But I mean, unless they're going to go at the Big House in Ann Arbor, I could see them doing. But in April in Michigan, it could be snowing in Philadelphia too in April. So
and that's something I was thinking about. That it's probably going to be. I mean, like the best case scenario for weather-wise would be for it to be roughly like it was at MetLife Stadium when they had WrestleMania there, because obviously New York is up that way as well. I think that I'm trying to think if what the figure was. I'll have to look it up. I won't do it now, but I'll look it up. But remember a couple of years ago they had, and maybe they've done this more than once, I'm not sure, but Virginia Tech and Tennessee played a football game at the Bristol Raceway.
Yeah.
I mean, Bristol is not the biggest raceway there is, but when you configure it for football, because you have all that space, I mean, I want to say it was like 100 and close to 130.
That would just be a tough place for everyone in the world to descend.
Impossible. You couldn't. I mean, think about like with football, like even if you're at the top row, you can still say like, okay, they look like ants, but I understand what these ants are doing. Like it's a football game. Mm-hmm. If you just have two ants and they're like, basically hugging each other from like half a mile away, it's pretty tough to kind of figure out what's going on. And you'd have a big screen of some kind, but still, that's tough.
Capacity. We're gonna have 80 at Wembley, 90 at WrestleMania. What a time for a wrestling fan right now.
And the thing that's crazy to me is to think about like some of those, the older, like the gigantic shows, high capacity shows from the days when technology for like big screens and stuff was not as great. So like you look at some of those photos from like WrestleMania 3, and they have like these projection screens that obviously they are big projection screens, but if you're like in the back of the like you can't see that. Like you would have to use binoculars just to see the screen.
Binoculars.
Much less the actual ring. I mean, it's crazy.
No doubt about it. Wrestling is always crazy. Join us on Thursday to talk AEW. Enjoy All In this weekend. Join us on next Tuesday. Kelsey will be here. TG will be here. I'll always be here. Thanks to Cheats. Thanks to the Family Podcast Network. And when you see us next time, we'll talk more WWE and more wrestling. TG, thanks, pal. See you guys next time. Appreciate it.